name is Gabby and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here then welcome to my channel. And today's video is going to be my top 10 favorite reads of 2024 and also shout outs to some of my favorite nonfiction books as well. Because I don't tend to rank or rate them, but I did read some really amazing nonfiction books this year, so they're getting their own section. And also any and all manga that I read in 2024 is getting its own video. I will have the content warnings for everything that I talk about today that I can find linked down below in the description, along with links to some resources, and let's go ahead and start with poetry. And that is not something that I've said for a while, maybe even ever, because it's been that long since I've read any type of poetry. But today we do have 3 collections to briefly talk about, including Blood Orange and Desecrated Poppies by Mix Yafa. Both of these were very real. You could really feel the author's emotions. There were some really amazing poems and lines in here that have stuck with me since I've read them. Desecrated Poppies also has some essays as well. And then we also do have Rifka by Muhammad Al-Kurd. Again, there were some really powerful and heartbreaking poems in here. And I also really love the way the poems that were in this collection called back to each other and referenced each other. So yeah, like I said, 2024 was the first year in a few years that I've read any poetry at all, which does make me sad because I used to read it a lot more. But this is definitely a start, a very good start, and I hope to read more in 2025. And moving on to the nonfiction books, and there are a lot of these, so we're gonna move through these a little bit quickly. Starting with They Called Me a Lioness, A Palestinian Girl's Fight for Freedom by Dana Takarui and Ahed Tamimi. And speaking of books and things that I think about a lot, this was incredible, and I haven't read a ton of memoirs in my reading life, and this made me want to. It was so captivating and also so educational at the same time, and I am so grateful that I got to learn about this person, her family, her allies in any way at all. And then we have All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, which was another memoir that was very heartbreaking at times and also really easy to get invested in. And then it also did have a lot of lovely moments of joy to it as well. Next is 100 Years War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. This had a lot of information. It refreshed what I already knew and also introduced me to some details that I didn't. Then we have Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Y. Davis, who is a very engaging and captivating speaker with a lot of engaging and captivating things to say. Moving on to The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This had 3 different essays in it that all detailed a story from this author's life, and again, very easy to get invested in, and it pulled a lot of different emotions out of me in a really strong way, and honestly, that can be said for all of these nonfiction books, and also the poetry. And finally, we have Let This Radicalize You, Organizing the Revolution of Reciprocal Care by Kelly Hayes and Miriam Kaba. It had a lot of tips and examples from various activists, and again, it was just a good reminder of what things were like during the time period that this book covers, which feels so far away somehow, even though it wasn't that long ago, like it was only a handful of years, but at the same time it also still felt incredibly current. Okay, so it is now time for my top 10 list, and in order to make this list there were 2 main requirements. 1, I had to have read it in 2024, and 2, it had to be a fiction book. Very easy, not really real requirements at all, but it's all that I really have this year, since I didn't have enough 5 stars to fill 10 spots like I usually do. So I had to fill in the bottom of my list with some other books, but luckily I did have some really amazing 4 to 4.75 star reads this year, so it worked out fine. And as always, I am basing this on rating, but I am mostly basing this on just what I feel in my heart. I also did get rid of the rank the books that are in a series together rule, because that felt just more correct for the group of books that I have here. There is one exception to that in the honorable mentions where I just did rank them together, because that just also made sense in my head to do. But before we get to number 10, I do have a lot of honorable mentions to quickly name. I believe these are all 4-star ratings, and I also did rank these books, so the book that I named last is the book that was closest to being number 10. Starting with Evil Eye by F. Toph Room, Larkin Kassim Start a Revolution by Kaysen Calendar, Avatar: The Last Airbender Suki Alone, Stars in Your Eyes by Kaysen Calendar, My First and Only Love by Sahar Khalife, The Do's and Donuts of Love by Adiba Jagradar, A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal, When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nevo, Hunting by Stars by Cherie Dimaline, Strike the Zither and Sound the Gong by Joan Ha, Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Lost Adventures and Team Avatar Tales, Behind You is the Sea by Susan Muaddi Daraj, Squire by Sarah Alphaji and Nadia Shamas, Lake Lore by Anna Marie Miclemore, and finally, Kaiju number 8, exclusive on the 3rd Division by Naoya Matsumoto and Keiji Ando. And that is going to bring us to my top 10. The top 6 are where my 5 stars begin, and again, these are all just basically ranked based on where my heart is at this moment, but it could really change at any time, because the closer this list gets to the top, the harder they got to rank. And it was also harder than usual this year, but we will get there when we get there. And beginning at number 10, we have If You Still Recognize Me by Cynthia So. And this follows our main character who is about to confess her feelings to her long-distance best friend that she met through a comic fandom. However, when her childhood best friend comes back into her life, our main character spends the summer both repairing old connections and making new ones. When I read this book, I honestly didn't expect for it to make this list, but I am so glad that it did. This was really fun, especially with the fandom aspect, and it also did call out the more problematic sides of fandom as well. I also really like the characters, which is something that I feel like we're going to be saying quite often today. There are a lot of sweet friendships and a sweet romantic relationship as well, and as for our main character, she is a little bit of a meddler, and that might be an understatement. But she does mean well. I really liked her. There were times where I found myself relating to her. The story also does have some mystery to it as well. There are quite a few secrets and stories that get uncovered here. But one of the larger plot lines, even though I did enjoy it, it did just feel so unrealistic to me that it took me out of the story some. But at the same time, it also did feel so YA contemporary in a way that I actually do really appreciate. This book is also very coming of age when it comes to self-expression and queerness, which I really liked. I tend to have a weakness for those kinds of stories, and this was no exception. And this also dives into some complex family dynamics. Our main character does go through it in here, but she also does have a lot of lovely moments of happiness as well. I also really liked how this book explored repairing old connections and how some of those relationships, even though there is hope there, they just don't really get repaired. I thought that they showed that off in a realistic way. The story also talks about loneliness. They don't talk about it as much as I expected them to, but what we did get from it really did resonate with me. I also did kind of want the romance to be paced / structured differently, because while I did really like them, I still feel like I missed out on getting to know the love interest more than I did. And I feel like getting to know her better would have allowed me to ship these two more than I did, and in the way that I wanted to, because like we were heading there, but we just never fully got there. But like I said, I still really like them, even if it does feel like we could have gotten to really love. But for the most part, I am very content with what I got from this book, and what I got was a very enjoyable, solid, late spring, early summer read, and I love that. And at number 9, we have The Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwrecks by Mackenzie Lee, which is the third and final book of the Montague Siblings trilogy, which begins with The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. And The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue follows our main character whose grand tour of Europe and quest for pleasure and vice is in danger. After this tour is over, he will be forced into taking over his family's estate and following all of the responsibilities that come with that. Therefore, he is determined to make the best of this year-long tour with his sister and his best friend / crush, but his recklessness ends up turning this trip into a manhunt across Europe. And The Nobleman's Guide follows the third and youngest sibling, Adrian. And I really liked and at times really did relate to Adrian as a character. I got attached to him very quickly. And I enjoyed following his journey here, and I appreciate just all of the character growth and like character deep dive into his mental health that we got in here. I also just really enjoyed like the adventurous nature of this story, and also like the silliness of most of the comedy, and also the much less silly mystery aspect to this story. But this book is not just about Adrian, it is also wrapping up the entire series, so all of the siblings are present, including Monty. And I got fully wrapped up into everything Monty had going on all over again. And I enjoyed how this book explored and developed Adrian's relationship with his siblings and just like the different complexities there. There are a couple of characters that I would have loved to have seen more of since this is the final book, and there is one character that I just really miss specifically. So I did spend a lot of time thinking about how he wasn't there, but otherwise I really enjoyed this book for what it was and how it wrapped up a series that I've been reading for a really long time now. Like, my brain has always categorized this series as one of the first ones that really got me into reading. So we have a lot of history together, and it was a fun time, and this book definitely has a special place in my heart because of it. And And at number 8, we have Never Whistle at Night, an Indigenous dark fiction anthology, and yeah, this is a dark fiction anthology written by Indigenous authors. And it was a very, very good one. I read this in October and on Halloween, and that was just such a great choice that I made for myself, because it contains some of the darkest, most horrific stories I've ever read, and it's very graphic about it. So yeah, that was fun too, in a way, I guess, but that was also just mostly disturbing. And I do mean disturbing as a compliment in this case, because that is exactly what I signed up for with this book. I also got to experience a lot of new authors while listening to this audiobook, and I also got to experience some of my favorites again. Not every story did work for me. Like I said, I listened to this on audiobook, and some of these stories were just kind of on, and there were an even smaller amount that I just didn't like or prefer. But the majority of these stories were just so incredible, and that's really saying something, because there are a lot of stories in this anthology, and the quality was just super high in terms of just concepts, writing style, and overall horror. And it found so many new and different ways to make me physically nauseous, so thanks. At number 7, we have Infinity Alchemist by Kaysen Callender. And this follows our main character Ash, who gets rejected by the Lancaster College of Alchemic Science, meaning that he cannot legally study magic. So he gets a job as the groundskeeper and begins learning alchemy in secret until he gets caught by an apprentice. And instead of having him arrested, she decides to make a deal with him that she will keep his secret if he helps her find the sacred book of Source, which gives its user extraordinary power. I mean, I think the best thing to come from me not having 10 5-stars this year is that I get to put Infinity Alchemist in this list, because I love this book so much. I got so invested in this. Like, this is one of those books that I opened it up, and once I started reading it, everything in my brain just went away, and I was just left with this. And I am so incredibly grateful for that experience, because it just doesn't happen enough. I really loved all 3 of our main characters individually, but also together as a trio. It did take me a little bit of time to get into our main character, but once I did, I really did. As for the villains, I appreciate the role that they play in the story, and it was fun to see our characters like strategize and race against them. But there was one character that I do think that I needed to see like a little bit more of, even though I don't want that, because I don't like him. So I don't want to see more of him in that sense, but also I do feel like I did need to see more of him, because there was a big moment that just kind of fell flat because I didn't. As for the romance, we do have a polyamorous relationship, which we love to see it, and I did really love them. Again, could we have dove a little bit deeper here to work things out a little bit further? I mean, yeah, there are some pretty damaged relationships in here, and like the book basically establishes that everything is going to be okay, but I do think I still wanted to see it like worked out on the page a little bit more. As for the world itself, it's very magical, very academia, and again, we do love that. The magic system itself was interesting. It felt very manifestation based, which I love, but also like the more that I thought about this magic system while I wasn't reading this book, the more questions that I had about it. Like, I still don't really think that the magic system is this book's strongest feature, but again, I said that I thought about it while I was away from the book. Because while I was actively reading this book, none of my complaints or critiques mattered at all, because I was so lost in and invested in this. The story itself also has very lovely, amazing commentary on love, your connections to others, to the world, and the universe at large, and also to yourself. And all of that combined with a really amazing writing style, and I've read a good handful of Kaysen Callender books at this point in my reading life, so that wasn't a surprise, but we do love the consistency. And this is just one of those cases where what I loved about this book just greatly outweighs what I think was a little bit weaker. So no, it's unfortunately not perfect, but I got so lost in everything about it, and it's still one of my favorites nonetheless. So yeah, Infinity Alchemist, it's a 5-star read in my heart, but now it's time to move on to my actual 5-star reads. Starting at number 6, where we have The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. And The Vanishing Half takes place over the course of the 1950s to the 1990s and follows 2 twin sisters who are living separate lives. And despite the lies and the miles that separate them, their paths are bound to cross again when their daughters' storylines intersect with one another. This book is split into different sections, and it took me the entire first section and a little bit of of the second to fully get into this book. But once I did get into this book, I looked back on those moments with just so much more appreciation, because I do have a lot of appreciation for this book just in general. It just got a little bit of a slow start for me, but at some point I got fully invested in this and in the characters, and I needed to know everything about them and their stories, which made me never want to put this book down, and that's when things no longer felt slow. They felt the opposite, actually. They flew by. This book is filled with such incredibly complex and interesting characters, and you get to see how the experiences that these characters have had have shaped them, and just like who they are throughout their lives. Like, there are some really terrible and upsetting people and things that happen and that are said in here, and some of that is even done by our main characters as well. And as the author's note talks about, this book really does have a major theme of transformation, and I just really felt and appreciated that while I was reading, and I still do. It was just really, really, really well done. At number 5, we have Katara and the Pirate Silver by Faith Erin Hicks with Adele Matera, Peter Wortman, Richard Starkings, and Jimmy Betancourt. And this is a standalone Avatar: The Last Airbender graphic novel that follows Katara after she is separated from the rest of Team Avatar during a sudden ambush from the Fire Nation. And in order to reunite with the rest of her team, she is going to have to team up with some unlikely allies and explore her tougher side. So if you don't know already, I am a huge Avatar: The Last Airbender fan, and I have been ever since I was a child. It is one of my favorite things in this world, and 2024 was the year where I finally started reading the comics, because I've always wanted new content from this series, and it's been really fun to get that new content in this format because they do very much read like an episode of the show. And Katara and the Pirate Silver is by far my greatest example of that, at least right now. And it's one that I actually do think that I underestimated going into it, because it really, really impressed me. Like, not only could this have easily been an episode of the show, but it would have been a huge standout for me, and that says something. And I love getting to see Katara show off her skills in here, and I also really like the new characters. And I would love and be so excited to see them again at some point. They were so interesting and on the morally gray side as well, so it was interesting to see Katara interact with them. And from an Aang, Toph, and Sokka's standpoint, their interaction and conversation with the Fire Nation soldier felt very current. Like, there were some very real-world undertones underneath like all of the silliness and shenanigans going on. This is probably one of the biggest, if not my biggest, surprise in my reading life this year. Like, I wasn't expecting to be as impressed with this as I was. Like, it's a pretty short comic book, but it really made the most of those pages for me and more. Okay, so these next 4 books are where things get hard for me in terms of ranking, because I considered all 4 of them for the top spot, and honestly, they're all really close. But a 4-way tie for first place isn't nearly as fun, so I ended up ranking them. It was not easy, but it did happen. So with that, number 4 is Outdrawn by Deanna Gray, and this follows one of our main characters, Noah, who after her webcomic makes it to the top 10 on the InkMic charts, she receives an offer for a full-time position at a company that is relaunching one of their cult classic comics. Everything is falling into place until she realizes that that means that she is going to have to work with her college rival. Which brings us to our other main character, whose name is Sage, and despite having a ton of raw talent and success, she is currently trying to fix her plateaued career by working on that same mainstream comic. These two are going to have to learn how to work together as a team, which is already hard, but things get much harder when they start to fall in love. So I found out this book existed in 2024, and as soon as I saw the description, I hauled it and read it as fast as I was able to. And it's always so nice when a book lives up to the hype and excitement that your brain builds up and makes up for it. And this was one of those cases, and the excitement that I had for this book was extremely high. And I love the focus on art and webtoons. Like, it inspired me to both want to draw, write stories, and also read more webtoons. And one of my only complaints about this book is that I would have loved to have seen more of the webtoons themselves, but that is my only complaint, and it's only because what we got was good. I also really loved and got attached to both of our main characters, and yes, this is one of those romance books that gives you like all of the cute and cheesy romance book stuff that you could ever want in the world, but it also combines with like really real, inspiring, and relatable character deep dives and growth. itself. And I love when romance books do that, and we'll have 2 others to talk about very soon. But first, the dates that they went on in this book, and just like the time that they spent together romantically, are some of my favorite moments of 2024. And I just love like the little space that they carved out for themselves. Like, it felt so special. They're also rivals to lovers, which I have had a little bit of a weakness for historically. And the banter ranged from fun to adorable, but I also thought that the way that this book handled this dynamic was interesting because they explore what that rivals dynamic means for their romantic relationship. And I just really loved and appreciated the communication there, and I love seeing the characters grow individually as well. Like, these two have and have had a ton of pressure on them throughout their lives and deal with things like imposter syndrome and feeling like you have to be perfect or work so hard to unreasonable standards to feel like you even belong or like you've made it, and just like doing everything on your own, letting go of control and the toll that can take on both your physical and your mental health, while also learning and trying to let people in and even just relying on them. And I love seeing them set boundaries with others and also with themselves, and I just found all of the growth to be really, really lovely and also inspirational. Like, I loved these two, and I really loved the cast of characters as well. Like, this had some really amazing found family dynamics in it, which, speaking of found family dynamics, at number 3 we have... At number 3, we have The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. And this follows our main character, who, as one of the few witches in Britain, has had to keep her magic a secret. But she posts videos to the internet of her pretending to be a witch, thinking that no one will take it seriously until somebody does. As she gets invited to the Nowhere House to teach magic to 3 young witches, and as she gets more comfortable in the house and with its inhabitants, she finally feels like she has somewhere that she belongs, but when things get dangerous, she is going to have to decide whether she is going to risk everything for her newfound family. This is a very cozy, very adorable book about witches, romance, and yes, found family. And I love all of that about it so much, but what I loved the most was just how that all paired with the conversations around loneliness and self-worth and trusting others. Those conversations hit me really hard, and I really connected to this book and specifically to our main character because of that. Like, there were lines in here that could have easily been taken straight out of my own head. And I do think that having that connection and understanding made me even more lost and even more invested in this book than I already was. And there really is just so much charm and heart here overall, and the characters have so many incredible moments when it comes to their own personal journeys. I love seeing them all interact and be happy together, and I also did enjoy this book's dark comedy, even if it was like an interesting tone shift at times. Like, there's still a part of me that's not sure if they should have gotten away with that for me, but they did. I was also super into the romance and just all of their conversations with each other. They made my heart feel so many things. They felt really steady, and Grumpy Sunshine is another dynamic that I have historically really loved, and again, this was no exception. But these two were also a little bit of a surprise at the same time, because I feel like his character specifically could have gone either way for me. Like, I was either going to really like or really dislike this guy. And I really did love him. Like, he was incredible, and so many of the characters in this book are incredible. There's a lot of love between them for sure. You can really feel it, and they all have their different ways of showing it. This is also one of the few books that I read this year that I wanted to reread as soon as I finished it. I also started annotating books this year and just like marking quotes that I really love. And I do like to think that I am a little bit picky about it, but I think that this book has the most tabs that I have ever put into a book. And overall, this is definitely another one that has a very special place in my heart for sure. And that is going to bring us to number 2, which is Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. And this is the second book in the Brown Sister trilogy, which is an Own Voices spicy adult romance series. And this one follows Danny, who after a video of them goes viral, decides to start fake dating her workplace's security guard. He's secretly a hopeless romantic, and she's looking for more of a friends with benefits type of situation, but it isn't long before what she wants begins to get much more complex. This was actually my first 5-star read of 2024, and I don't think that I realized at the time that I finished it that it would be so high up on this list. But here we are, and this was also the last book that I needed to read in order to finish the trilogy, because I did read them a little bit out of order. And it was like the complaints that I had about those other 2 books, which were minor to even begin with. Like, I love those books. It felt like this book didn't do those things. Like, I had 0 pacing issues with this, which that was my main complaint about both of the other romances. And again, it's another rom-com, except this one is spicier, but it still gives all of that amazing amazing character deep dive stuff that I've been talking about in this video, which is something that I think that this entire trilogy just does really well in general. It's one of, if not my favorite thing about it. And once again, there were things that were said and explored in this book that I have thought about a lot since finishing it, and that I have tried to think about in real life situations, which I am very grateful for. And this book was also just a lot of fun. Like, the banter was so funny and adorable. The dynamic is a little bit grumpy sunshine, which again, we really love that here. And then there is also fake dating, which was fun and also properly angsty when appropriate. And I do mostly read fake dating for that angst and resolution. I also really love them as individual characters as well, especially Dani. She is so incredible, one of my favorite main characters that I've read this year. There were also things in this book that from any other book I think I probably would have hated, but this book got away with it somehow. And also just made it work, or at least made them ignorable enough. And when I first looked into this trilogy, I was excited for both of the other two books in this series more than I was for this one. It's why I read it last. But in a way, I also think that that was fate. Like, I think this is the way that I was supposed to end this series, because we just gelled together. And it ended up being my one and only 5-star read in this trilogy, even though the other two did get really close. And I wasn't expecting that, and I love that I got to end one of my favorite series with this book, even if it is book 2. So with that, it is now time to name my favorite read of 2024, and that is going to be Celestial Monsters by Aiden Thomas, which is the sequel to the Sunbearer Trials. And the Sunbearer Trials takes place in a world where at the beginning of each decade, the sun's power must be replenished in order for the evil obsidian gods to stay at bay. 10 semidioses are chosen to compete in the Sunbearer Trials, where the loser is sacrificed so that their body may protect everyone for the next 10 years. Our main character is the trans son of the goddess of birds, and he has never really worried about the trials other than worrying about others in regards to the trials. However, that all changes when he gets chosen to compete against opponents who are better trained and more powerful than himself. And the Sunbearer Trials is one of my favorite books of all time. It was on this position on this list a couple of years ago. So in a way, putting Celestial Monsters at number 1 does kind of feel like my boring expected choice for my favorite book of 2024, but it also feels so right to me at the same time. So needless to say, I really needed this book to not disappoint me. I pre-ordered it, I read it as soon as it became available to me, I finished it, and it was amazing, thankfully. And a lot of that is thanks to Aiden Thomas and Aiden Thomas's writing style. Like, there's a reason 3 of this author's books have been my favorites of the years that I've read them in. Celestial Monsters just felt so atmospheric and beautiful at times, and I really loved getting to explore the world and the different settings. They were all so interesting and fun, and there were so many amazing concepts, new characters, and just beings out there. And this is also a book that had a lot of layers to it. It really dove into the social hierarchy of the world and the privilege that the golds and the jades have had and how the history has been altered and covered up. And you get to see the characters learn those things and form their own opinions and just how it impacts their actions in the story. And speaking of the characters, they are some of my favorites ever. And same for the romance. I love them so much. They all have so much chemistry with one another, making all of their relationships, whether that's friendships, romance, rivals, or even just like the villains, just some of my favorite dynamics ever. Like, this book just felt, and this series has always felt like it was just on another level for me entirely. And the relationships and the characters really do feel like at least a part of the reason why it feels that way. And there were just so many little moments and also big moments and like lines of dialogue and banter that were all just so good, and everyone really came to life. I also think that I somehow managed to underestimate how much I miss these characters in between books, or maybe I just like successfully distracted myself. I don't know. There's one plot twist in here that I thought happened a little bit fast, and also a moment towards the end that I thought wrapped up a little bit too quickly from an emotional standpoint with the characters. But I also don't mind those things that much because everything else was so incredible. Like, I really loved this book, and I loved it both as a book that continued a story from a book that I already really loved and just gave me more and new content from that story, and I also really loved it as a finale that wrapped it all up. And even though it is so attached to the Sunbearer Trials, it did very much feel like its own thing as well. Like, this felt different than that book, and I still loved it. And it gave me so many amazing moments, and I just look back on those moments with so much love. So yeah, the top 4 of this video were so close that I might as well not have even ranked them, but since I did, I just couldn't see anything else in this top soft spot but this book. Okay, so that is all that I have for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and answer the question that'll be around here if you want to do that, and hopefully I will see you here next time. Bye!